Welcome to the North Witch Podcast with your hosts Azariel Flame and Sandra Von Holland. In this podcast, we explore all the things that can help us to be better and improve our lives in body, mind, and spirit. Looking at everything from witchcraft, sorcery, woo-woo, spirituality, biohacking, the mundane, and everything in between. We occasionally have on guests from various backgrounds, practices, and philosophies. We welcome everyone from all walks of life, from the left-hand path to the right-hand path, from the medical to the holistic, from the woo-woo to the scientific, and everything in between. We have conversations and discussions about our experiences over the years, what works for us, what hasn't worked, and explore new theories and science, trying them out, seeing what works, and debunking what doesn't. Thank you for joining us on this wicked adventure along the crooked path as we adventure into the mysterious and wonderful world and welcome what truly works for us to become better witches, sorcerers, magicians, and our best selves so that we can live our best lives. May these conversations help you to ignite the light within. The views expressed by our guests on this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of us here at North Witch Magick Co. All of the information shared on this podcast is anecdotal and shared for entertainment purposes only, and does not constitute medical or financial advice. Always consult a doctor, physician, or professional in their field before trying any of the things that may be discussed on this channel. Magic and holistic healing should work alongside allopathic care when necessary. Hi, everybody, and welcome back for another exciting episode of the North Witch Podcast. We are back for our first episode for season 2, and we thought we would start it with a bang because our lovely friend Mat Auryn just released a wonderful new book called Mastering Magick. So we have Mat on today to talk with us. How's it going today, Mat?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
We're cold. We're out here in Canada. This is the first day that it has started finally dumping snow. We've got about a foot of snow outside. It's a little bit ridiculous, especially since I just got back from Florida and I'm really not acclimated to it yet.
We're never ready. Doesn't matter. We're just never ready. It could be January and we're still not ready. It's okay.
But at least the first snowfall is really pretty. And it feels kind of magical. I lived in the Salem area for about like 5 or 6 years, and like it'd be really pretty for snowfall, and then it's just disgusting from all the cars and
yeah,
absolutely.
But you guys are a little bit more rural, right?
Yeah,
we're very rural. Yeah.
Yeah, we are hidden in the boonies. So, but that's the way that we like it, you know.
Yeah.
This morning was so magical, though. Like when you say magical, the first snowfall, it was all horror frost this morning. So it was beautiful. I had to head out to an early appointment, and the sun was coming up, and all the sparkles, and it was great.
That's awesome.
See, we have to find the magic in it if we're going to be living in it.
Yeah,
for sure. And so your book just came out. It just dropped. It's available pretty much everywhere books are sold. And this is a true follow-up to Psychic Witch, right? Like this is meant to be a sequel.
Yeah. But it also is sort of a standalone. I had the struggle when writing this of like, I can't please everyone. So I was like, do I repeat a bunch of stuff in the first book to build upon what needs to be done for this one? Or do I just say, check like exercise 14 in Psychic Witch, because people would be either like, oh, he's repeating the same stuff, or, oh, I have to buy another book to buy this. So I tried to make it as standalone as possible, although it does reference Psychic Witch. My friend, Laura Tempest Zakroff, she just released a sequel to Sigil Witchery, and she referred to it as like a sibling book. And that's how I feel this is. Like they're siblings, they make sense together, but you don't need one for the other. But I am definitely like progressing in what I'm teaching.
I love that analogy. That's perfect.
Yeah, and it is a great book. I've read it, and it was, I've been saying Psychic Witch is the book that everybody needs to start with for, since it released, and we always ensure that we have it stocked. And now we're going to ensure that this one's stocked as well, because it is for sure hands down, I would probably say if somebody's starting witchcraft, these two books are, they push it into a way that is easily digestible and easily accessible, which is something that a lot of books kind of miss the mark on. They either expect that you have a whole bunch of knowledge prior, or they're just truly a beginner book, and you really walked the line there with having stuff for everybody in it. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about it. I mean, I've been doing witchcraft for 20 years, and there was stuff in there that I was like, oh, I didn't think about doing it that way. That's awesome, right? So
Thank you.
You did quite well with making it very accessible to everybody.
Good. That's my goal. I not to knock other beginner books, because there are great beginner books out there, but sometimes I read some of the beginner books coming out, and I feel like it's like patronizing in a way, like they're kind of talking down to the person. Like I don't know, it just feels very like baby spoon fed, and I don't want that. Like I want to treat all my readers as if they are intelligent people that just aren't familiar with the subject.
You
Absolutely.
completely, as a beginner, acknowledging the witch world, because I didn't know that we had to label things. I just did things. So
Right.
for me, in that perspective, it's perfect. It's like, oh, well, that totally makes sense. And I have the psychic witch because Azariel, of course, as he says, always says you need to read this one first. So true to his story. And I can't show you because, it sort of shows with my background. It doesn't show that I have the book here, but I do. And then I did the Audible on the new book. So you nailed it. It was not overwhelming. It was all a lot of aha moments. So it was a fantastic job.
Thank you. Yeah, I was kind of nervous with this one because Psychic Witch did so well. And then everyone was like bombarding me like, oh, like, how are you going to follow this up? Like, don't you feel a bunch of pressure? And it's like, well, I do now.
I didn't know I was supposed to.
Yeah. And so like I had this book was very difficult to write, particularly because this sounds super woo, which is our realm, right? But I usually get the book titles as well as like for the first book, I had Owl. In this one, I had Moth. They come to me in dreams, and I kind of am like, okay, so this is what the cover is going to look like. This is what the book's going to be about. And Moth is not easy to work with because Moth is all about going in that cocoon, right? Melting, completely dying in primordial goo, and then like being rebuilt. And that's sort of how this book process felt. It's changed many times from its original conception of what you get now. And I don't know if you are familiar with, well, of course you're familiar with, but if you're like super big into Alanis Morissette, but I remember like in the 90s, like her first album was bigger than she expected to, or anyone expected. And people said the same thing to her, like, oh, how are you going to follow this up? How are you ever going to do an album better than this? And luckily, I didn't have that level of pressure because she went through a whole like depression, suicidal thing, and had to be, her family like flew her to India, which is the whole like thank you India thing she did on that song. But I'm going off topic, but
Great. We never know where these go.
I was very pleasantly surprised that people seem to enjoy the second one. I've even gotten feedback that people like it more, which really, really surprised me. Because I had COVID writing half of the book. So I was like, oh man, I don't know if people are going to like this, but I always just try to make the motive of like, I'm helping people, what do I need to teach them to get them empowered and casting magic and in tune with their senses.
Absolutely. And I think you nailed it. Like the exercises in this book, as well as in Psychic Witch, are very well thought out. They're tools that if you actually do the work, you can't not get some kind of a result, which isn't something that you see in a lot of books. Lots of things are like, oh, well, if you do this technique, this may or may not happen. Whereas with these, it's like, if you do this, this is what's going to happen, and it's cumulative. And I love that, because you build upon each previous exercise and it just keeps getting more and more real. And I think that's something that we need to see more of in, especially, kind of like the beginner intermediate book area, is people need to see progression, and lots of the beginner books really miss that. And I think you totally nailed that, because by the time that you get to the end of Mastering Magick, you're doing full on planetary work. You are, you're casting circles, you're learning how to cast small circles just with your hands. And you're like, there's so many cool little techniques that you put in there that I think that even advanced practitioners are going to find things in there that, will add to their practice, and are simple things that you can add in, 5-10 minutes a day. And you're really going to notice a big difference with it. At least I have. I've been doing them since I got the book on release day, and it's awesome. Like it really is truly empowering magic, which, like I say, you don't see things that are, guaranteed to work in a lot of things, right? So
yeah. With my books, aside from the contributor spells, everything that I put in the book is stuff that I know works, that I've gotten to work, that, I'm not just making stuff up and like presenting it to the public, which, I don't know if other authors do that or not. But the contributors that I did pick for Mastering Magick are all magical practitioners that I trust, that like, I'm like, they know what they're doing. They're going to provide something great. But there are some things like I have the whole approach to like ADHD and like aphantasia in the book. And for that, like I got friends of mine who have those conditions. And I came up with, I think it was like 7 different exercises, and I presented it to them, and I was like, try these out, see how they work. And obviously there aren't 7 in the book because not all of them worked for them. So what made it into the book was what did work, because there's no point in doing magic if it's not going to work.
Absolutely. And that's another cool thing too, is that, you were so inclusive with it. And that's something that as somebody else who teaches magic, I find that a lot of people have that aphantasia, or the inability to focus, or the inability to visualize, or whatever. And that's something that I've struggled with, with teaching over the years. And so when I saw those exercises, I was like, oh, he's got it. This is awesome. So, and I have presented those to a couple of my students that, I don't know how to help you here because I don't have this problem, but I can guarantee that if you try this out of Mastering Magick, it probably will. So hopefully you get a few more book sales out of that at least.
Yeah, well, and see, and that's what I mean, because the exercises that I had crafted and I presented to them, I could all get them to work, but my point wasn't for me. So, getting that feedback and that kind of like trial group was incredibly helpful for me. Because I don't want to, like you said, like, I don't want to present something that doesn't work for people if they can't visualize or they have difficulty focusing.
There's quite a group that don't visualize. And it's surprising because those of us that do, you don't even think that there's people that don't. So it's great that you have acknowledged them, right? Because it is a lot more people than we think.
Yeah, and I think also, at least my experience teaching, I think a lot more people think that they can't visualize than actually can't. There are definitely people with aphantasia that just can't visualize at all. But one of the things I tried to like point out in Psychic Witch was, that screen of and there's just that quick flash of just like an image, that is visualization. And so like, if you can do that, you can build that to eventually become that kind of focused, concrete visualization. But with all of these things, it takes work, there is no fast food, quick, easy fix for anything. But there are definitely people who, no matter how much work they put into it, their brains just aren't working in a way that can visualize on command, or, people with ADHD, for example, can't focus no matter how hard they try. So.
Right.
Absolutely. So now with you saying that, that actually does lead well into one of the questions that I received for you. And it is, in your experience, are there some people who just can't open their psychic senses? And if so, are there any workarounds that you have found for them practicing witchcraft if they're not able to do that?
I have never come across that with any students, any workshop people. I think part of it is the expectation of what psychic ability means and how much of a spectrum it is. So just like I was saying with visualization, how like, when you're reading a book and you have that like quick flash of like, oh, the woman's hair's red, and you just see it for that split second, it's something that you build up on. Psychic ability is a lot like that, where it feels very, very subtle when it first starts coming to you, and as you strengthen those muscles, it becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. But I believe that anyone who tries to put any work into it will see results. Because as I say in Psychic Witch, I believe it's something we're all born with. And I believe that it's actually how we operate before we're incarnated as physical entities. Anyone who does mediumship knows that a lot of the communication back and forth of reception and also projecting isn't necessarily through the physical senses. It's more of like a psychic, seeing images, internal hearing things, knowing things. And I think that's the language of spirit. And we're spirits before, we have this meat suit on.
I love that, this meat suit. That's great.
Totally makes
And
sense.
it's all about also the trusting.
Yes.
Isn't that so huge in the process, is that trust in what is coming, and that it is a process, and trust what's happening. And
yeah, and that's why I think the second or third exercise in Psychic Witch, I adapted to be for like, the individual reader. But originally what I would do is I would sit two people with each other, two strangers in my workshops, and I would have them, essentially pretend to be super psychic and just have fun with it. Don't worry about being wrong, just, blab. And the only rule is you can't say no. Because as soon as someone hears no, they can be like 85% correct. And then that one little thing where someone's like, no, they just totally shut down, like all their self-doubt kicks in. And what I have learned from I'm retired now, but a professional psychic for so many years, is a lot of times people will say no, or they'll be like, no, that's not right, that's not possible. It isn't necessarily true. It ends up being correct. They just either don't have the information, or there's something they're not connecting in the moment. But if you hear no and you take it as a like, oh shit, I'm doing this wrong, what am I doing? It can totally shut down all of that sort of connection that you have. And that's why I think role playing and just treating it as something, fun and silly is extremely helpful, because everyone is sort of amazed in those workshops how much they got correct at the end of it, by just allowing themselves to have that kind of permission slip.
And that's huge, right? Is that, no, it's okay to have these things. And it's also, don't you find that when you're in the community, it is better than just being solo on your own and, oh, let's not talk about it. And whereas you come together, like in your workshops, people obviously will do better there with the encouragement of community.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely something to be said about that sort of positive reinforcement, because a lot of our shutting down of those kind of psychic senses, because I feel children are super psychic, and you only have to spend time with the child to realize how weird they are and how magical and how psychic they are. And that sort of shuts down after a while. It's usually around like age 7 or so. And that is coincidentally the same time in sociology where children start realizing people have strong opinions on them based on how they act and what they say, So there's definitely this kind of like correlation between, I don't know if society is the word, but like environmental social influence and these things kind of receding in people. So having that really supportive environment, I feel, is super conducive. I know, for example, like mediumship, most mediumship development groups are development circles where people just get together and they're like, let's do it, and it's very supportive, very encouraging. And yeah, I think it's all that sort of, um, pushing aside that sort of like self-doubt and also, what people might think of me for doing this kind of a thing is super crucial.
Yeah.
For sure. And I like how you said that people's expectations kind of are a part of it as well. If their expectations are too high, like, if you're doing an invocation and you're expecting, let's just pick Baphomet, for example, you're expecting that you're going to see Baphomet fully manifest in front of you as if he's really standing there, you're probably not going to have that experience. But if you're going to get that flash of Baphomet in your head and you're going to see your incense smoke doing different things than it normally does, and all of a sudden your candles grow brighter, and that feeling that we all get when we know that we have spirit contact happening, those are the things that people tend to dismiss, but you kind of really did a really good job in showing that, these little things really are the big things. And that's kind of one of the key things that I took from this book, as well as your last book, is that, if you're able to tune into those little subtleties, that's where the true magic really is, right?
Yes. And it can also inform you of like, if you did it or not, like you said, there's, oh my God, this sounds so pretentious, but there's a je ne sais quoi when a spirit is in the room, particularly like a deity. And it's really hard to define, but usually people have sort of a similar feeling, like the air pressure sort of changes a little. There's just sort of like almost like, your hair starts kind of standing up, like you just know like that it's there. But if you're not really in touch with your senses and your body, you'll even miss those very like sort of intuitive clues. And there are experiences that borderline things that like I wouldn't discuss in public, but like there are times where it almost feels like they're appearing before you and you may even see them. But the thing with psychic ability and witchcraft is the way that it's been ingrained in sort of our minds through media has it sort of at like, 11. And usually like the perception of those things aren't 11. It's not like you get hit on the head and all of a sudden you're seeing extreme vivid flashes of like, like you're in the middle of a car wreck or whatever. Like psychic ability usually doesn't feel like that, though it can. And I don't want to dismiss, the extreme vividness that it can sometimes come, but it usually isn't like that. Usually it's very, very subtle because we're working with subtle energies, both receptive and projective in our magic.
Absolutely. Totally makes sense. So I really love that you gave like a number of tools in here. Like you've given, multiple different ways to, ground things out, cleanse things out. Like I absolutely loved the salt and fireball. I think that's a fantastic technique. So how important is that, kind of maintaining your cleanliness, in your opinion, for being able to have these perceptions?
It depends on, so cleanliness, if we mean like external cleanliness, like energetic cleanliness, yes and no. So it depends on what you mean. And if we're talking about psychic ability or magic, psychic ability, I feel like the sort of cleanliness that is the most important is your mind. And that's why I put such an emphasis on meditation, is this ability to sort of be, I think the metaphor I use in the book is like a clear pond, where it's just receptive and it's quiet and you can just see what kind of comes, see or feel, or how whatever sense comes through. but when it comes to magic and it comes to manifestation, that's when I feel like cleanliness in other terms is a lot more important. I'm super big on clean environments for magic, and even, tidying up a little bit before I do a ritual or a spell. Because there is something to be said about creating an atmosphere that just psychologically feels magical and clean. But going to the idea of, and it's expressed in many cultures in different ways, but like the Greeks have the word I like the best, which is miasma. This sort house getting dusty doesn't mean that you're like a dirty, disgusting, bad person, right? It's just something that naturally sort of accumulates, and that happens with us as well. And particularly when you are approaching spirit or deity, you essentially want to be clean and purified, as a form of respect to show them, like it's sort of like, if you invite someone over for a meal or something, right? You want to make sure your house is clean. You want to make sure you look good, just because it's good etiquette. And it shows that, like there is sort of a care and concern about like, your guest. And I feel is very similar spiritually and magically. But sometimes, sometimes we can't do that. Sometimes, like we're working all day, and we're still out like in the woods or whatever, and we're not, necessarily super clean or have the materials to be clean, but we want to do magic. And I think sometimes just being sort of forthright and honest about that is super helpful, it's just treat it like people. That's how I deal with spirits, as people you respect. So it'd be like, oh, like pardon my grossness right now. I am as pure as I can be. Please overlook it. Let's do some magic. When it comes to manifestation, I'm also big on clearing room to clear the etheric energy out so that you have more of a container to receive the manifestation. And this is a trick I learned years ago from my friend Oceana. And it's always worked. So if I'm trying to manifest something big, I usually go through a purge in my life of just getting rid of things, because I'm kind of creating that energetic container within my life to receive.
Yeah, the more with the feng shui method, right? We need to clear the clutter for the positive energy to come in of whatever we're manifesting, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think you did I love that chapter. I was driving back home tonight and I was reading that, listening to that. He was telling me all about the grounding and cleansing, and I like that. You did great on explaining the difference on whether you're washing your hands, like you wouldn't have a shower before supper, but you would wash your hands. And so you did it. I like that explanation. I think it was pretty great for everyone.
Yeah, I always try to, when I'm teaching, I try to, as much as possible, compare it to everyday life or fictional pop culture things, just stuff that people will understand. So it's not as abstract of a concept. And that's a great example of it, like the washing your hands versus taking a full-on shower.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great.
And as far as taking things that are, a little bit more abstract and making them easier to understand, well done with making the Cabellion stand out the way that you did. Because when I first saw it in there, I was like, oh, here we go. Let's see how this goes. And then by the time I was done that section, it was like, wow, you nailed that. You got the core concepts down, and in a way that is, it's modern. It's you made it much more poetic in a way that people are able to easily digest and understand. And that's one of those books that either you love it or you hate it, right?
Yes.
Like there's almost no middle ground with that. It's one of those areas of contention amongst the occult community, and I was really pleasantly surprised with how well you handled that. And just you took these hermetic concepts that we all, we learned them growing up and getting into the craft, and we kind of put them on the back burner, but you made it much more relevant than I think that any other reading of it that I have had did. So congratulations with
Thank
that.
you.
So
Yeah,
from a beginner point, because I think our listeners will have totally not be understanding what you're asking, Azariel. So Matt, if you could explain that from
okay. Yeah,
what that
so
means.
the Kybalion is kind of controversial in occultism, as Azariel is saying. People either love it or hate it. And part of the reason is because it's people associate it with Hermeticism. And Hermeticism is a very ancient, Greek philosophy. And the Kybalion claims to be a book written by 3 initiates that is explaining the mysteries of Hermeticism from an insider point of view. We believe that it was ghost written by William Atkinson, and he was the publisher. But it's not super ancient, the book itself. And so what the book itself seems to be, and I try to be very honest about this when I'm presenting it in Mastering Magick, it seems to be a mixture of that ancient Hermetic belief with new thought and theosophy kind of mixed together and boiled in. And it's supposed to be the sort of like keys to the universe, like how the universe functions and how you as a person can essentially manifest and create change, because the whole idea is based on the idea that source, God, whatever name you want to put on it, we're all a part of that, and we're a microcosm. We're sort of like a mini version of that. So it's just explaining how the universe works, how the great mind, spirit, God, whatever name you want to put on it, how it functions in the universe, and how you as a part of the all and a sort of microcosm of it can also manifest by understanding these principles. So I hope that was an okay explanation of it. It's a lot to try to kind of boil down.
Yeah. I think that gives our listeners a better concept of what Azariel just kind of popped in on. And I don't, if they haven't read your book, I don't know if that would have made them be lost or not. So I think that's good clarification.
Yeah, so it's regardless on how old it is or not. A lot of my witchcraft teachers were like, this is solid principles, like if you want to understand how magic works and how to tap into it. And a lot of it is based upon the idea that everything in the universe is a thought. It's the thought of the all. And you are a thought of the all, but you also have a mind, so you have the ability to think. So essentially, by laying out these principles of how mind and energy interact with one another, it's sort of an amazing framework for understanding how magic works on a theoretical level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you nailed it. I guess the biggest reason why a lot of people have issues with it is because it used a lot of old terms. It used a lot of non-inclusive terms that were, nowadays we look at it and you're like, oh, you're talking about masculine and feminine, and we can't do that. And so I think you handled that extremely well. And, you presented it in a way that you got those core concepts that we kind of take them for granted, but they, like you said, they are almost the keys to the universe if you know how to use them and if you know how to receive them and how to present them. And so you did it in a way that makes it so that I think anybody will be able to read that and go, okay, well, this is how, polarity works, and this is how, this works. And they're going to be able to really get something good and positive out of it. And I don't think that it matters.
I don't come over.
Oh, did I just glitch
Yeah,
out?
you did the thing.
Anyway, I think that you really presented it quite well, and I think it'll be really, really well received, which is, the Kybalion itself wasn't necessarily that well received. So I just wanted to say good job on that, because it's,
Well, I think it's a brilliant book in terms of the principle it presents. But like you said, there is a lot of outdated language and metaphor. And if you can understand what the metaphor is trying to get at and sort of abandon the language, then you have the key. And one of the things that I find in magical spirituality and occultism is a lot of times people confuse the symbol for what it's symbolizing. And it sort of misses the point completely. You know, there's like that Buddhist saying of the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the book of like, okay, like let's try to explore what this is trying to say. But yeah, I kind of like, I'm not very kind to the principle of gender in the book, and I explain why, and I explain what it's trying to explain, and that is powerful, what it's trying to explain. But it's hard to look at any occult book from Victorian times or pre-Victorian and not find problems in it. And people are either of two camps, just like the Kybalion, where it's either like they embrace it all, like without any critical thinking, or they totally dismiss and renounce it. And I think that when it comes to these writings of like dead occultists, I think we can have the nuance of like trying to see like, well, what is the valuable golden nugget in here and what is problematic, what applies, what is personal bias, what is societal bias, while still being sort of honest about it. A lot more than like if an alive author or teacher is teaching problematic things, you know, like I don't want to support that. But if the person has been dead for like, you know, 6 decades, like, you know, I think we can try to find the wisdom without worrying about supporting their platform.
And maybe they were doing the best they could with what they knew then as well, right? If it's 6 decades ago, gosh.
Yeah, I think particularly the Kybalion is a good example of that, because, you know, it seems like the author or authors, because we aren't 100% sure, it's just we kind of guess who wrote it. They're explaining the principle of gender and they're trying to be like, you know, it doesn't mean sex, like, you know, and then they give all these other examples where you're like, that has nothing to do with gender, you know? So it's sort of like they're progressive in a sense, but they're still bound to the language of their time and their predecessors in trying to explain it. But then there's other, you know, occult writers from Victorian times where it's like, we could easily say like, yes, it was societal influence. Yes, it was, you know, whatever. But that also kind of dismisses the people of that time that were fighting those ideas and didn't have problematic views. So I think, you know, I mean, even some of our greatest, what we consider our greatest occult writings, like Dion Fortune. Dion Fortune has some really, really problematic stuff in her writing. You know, every now and then there's like casual anti-Semitism or, you know, homophobia or what have you, you know. That doesn't mean all her work is crap. You know, there's definitely some amazing stuff in there. My favorite example is Aleister Crowley. I think Aleister Crowley is one of the most brilliant occultists of all time. I think he is a shit person. I would not like him at all as a human being, but as a magician, I can recognize his genius and be able to be like, oh, this is awesome tech. This is awesome theory. While being like, wow, this thing you just wrote here is just like, you're kind of a shitty person, dude, you know, and kind of separating the two.
I like that.
For sure.
And I love that your analogy of it, that he's a shitty person. And that's okay, right? Like Azariel and I always talk about that quite often, actually, is that, well, I don't have to agree with them, but are they a good person? Like, that's what matters.
Right. Well, and when they're dead, like I was saying, it's a lot easier to like pan for the gold than if they're alive and you're like, okay, I'm supporting this person's, you know, platform.
Absolutely. And, you know, you just brought up Crowley. That's another thing, you know, you threw Resh in there, and it was, you know, done in a way that was, you know, very inclusive, very not Crowley, and very, you know, you got to the core principle of it. And I
Right.
love that you used his whole thing of, your own crude rituals should be more effective than, even the most polished rituals. And you took something that is, very thelemic, very, part of their everyday practice, and you boiled it down to the core principles. And, this is how I do this. And so
Right.
I loved that you pound for that gold, and
Yeah. I mean, because I don't think most people like have that aren't Thelemites, particularly like in the OTO or whatever. Like, I think the average person reading my book probably doesn't have a relationship with those deities or the cosmology that he's drawing on. But one of the things I'm super big on, like you were talking about how like, I try to present things that work. So I'm always trying to see like, what is the tech in it? That's what I call it. The traditional term, using Crowley's terms, would be the science of the magic. So I'm trying to see what makes it tick. Why does it work? And try to strip all those trappings that may not necessarily be beneficial. Those trappings that are essentially, by Crowley's definition, the art of magic, the kind of spirit relationship that you have and with the thing. So yeah, with Resh, I had this whole thing of like, it is a powerful practice in my opinion. But can we still make it a powerful practice without, saluting these Egyptian and Kemetic gods that we may know nothing about? And my opinion is yes. Yes, you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing that is absolutely apparent throughout the book, is that you did take these concepts that are some of them are 100 years old or even much older, and you did really boil it down to the actual true tech and the true science that is the magic and the sorcery that is behind it. And that's really what I appreciate the most about these books, is that you have taken the effective principles of them and you have put it in a way that you can't not understand it. And that's something that like I've had a lot of teachers over 20 years of doing this, and a lot of them it's like, well, why does that work? And they're like, well, because my teacher told me it works, right? And
Yeah,
it's
right.
like, okay, well, that's not, you're not furthering why I should want to do this, right? Like when I first learned Resh, that's exactly what I was told. Well, it does stuff. It lines you up with the sun. And
Right.
so your description was much better.
Well, and one of the things that I really try to drive home in this book, and I kind of start mentioning it in the conclusion of Psychic Witch, but with this book, I put an emphasis on the fact that like with magic, you need to have a relationship with it and it needs to work for you. So, even me, I don't have a relationship with those solar deities, with, Ra Horkut in his boat in the heavens. Like I don't, on a deep level, I don't connect with that. And so not connecting with it is going to make it harder for me to connect with it energetically and do the process. And it's not that the process won't work if I don't, fully appreciate those deities, but if I can find a way to make it personalized, like Crowley said, crude, personal, rituals versus these highly polished, elaborate ones, it's going to be a lot more effective. And to make magic work in your life, you need to be able to connect with it on that sort of personal level.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you there. So I do have some more questions here for you. So I'm just going to throw one at you now, because I threw it up on
Gotcha.
Facebook and everybody was like, oh, this is great. We get to talk to Matt. So I kind of picked some of the gems out of there. So we kind of covered this already a little bit, but I just wanted to throw it at you to see if maybe you had some other ideas for it. But what, in your experience, is the easiest way to open up your psychic senses to better understand spirit communications?
Meditation. Like honestly, just that, and I know some people are like, oh, meditation. And that's one of the things people didn't like about the first book, is my emphasis on meditation. But I keep coming back to, and a lot of the people I respect as magicians and occultists will say similar things, just that ability to essentially clear your mind, but also understand how your mind works. Because when you understand how you think, you can start to discern when something is being kind of conjured by yourself and when you're receiving something. And spirit usually works with the stuff, you know, the sort of database that's in your head. But there's, again, that je ne sais quoi that just comes with experience of understanding, like, this thing I just received is not from me. Like, there's something communicating with me right now, so I need to tune in to it. So for me, I think meditation is definitely the strongest thing you can do to build and strengthen your ability to communicate with spirit. And as we were saying earlier, you know, spirit speaks through those psychic senses, you know, so meditation is such a big part of developing those psychic senses. So
that really surprises me that you say that people didn't like that in the psychic witch. I just, it's surprising to me, because since I've learned meditation, it is just so, it's life-changing.
yeah, it totally
Really.
is.
And so whether you're doing it just to betterment your life or to be, which leads to all this, I think, it's
Yeah,
just an integral part of it. I can't imagine someone not going, that being an aha moment for them, going, oh, I need to learn how to meditate.
yeah, and you know, and I think most people received it well, but there are some people who want quick, fast fixes.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You know, and when it comes to these things, when it comes to perceiving the unknown and changing reality, essentially, which is what magic is, you know, it's going to take work, it's going to take time, and you know, one of the biggest feedbacks was the ADHD thing. And that's why in Mastering Magick, I'm also like, you don't need to sit down and close your eyes to meditate.
Mhm.
Let's find some other ways to meditate. Try to find, you know, pinpoint what is the goal. The goal is to sort of clear your mind and get into an altered state. So how can we do this in like the form of like dancing or walking or art? You know, you find in different groups that aren't magical. I don't know if groups is the right word, but like dancing, for example, they have in the zone, you know, there's certain terms for that state of consciousness when it happens. And that's essentially where you want to get. But yeah, for me personally, meditation is life-changing, like you said. And I do feel it is the foundation of all of this stuff to actually get it to work.
And people just need to be patient with themselves, because meditation is a hard thing. And so you just have to do it messy, and you have to be okay that you suck at it. Because seriously, I'm sure I sucked at it for like 6 months. Like,
and one of the biggest misconceptions is that whole idea of like, oh, I get distracted too easily, you know, and as I tried to drive home in both my books, that distraction is the meditation, that recognizing, oh, I've lost my focus, let's bring it back. That's building those muscles, you know, that's the resistance of the weight.
exactly.
So every time you recognize that and come back, you're becoming better at meditation. And I think, you know, people have this idea that you're going to be fantastic at it right away, like a Buddhist monk, you know, that's like living in the Himalayas their whole life. And you're not. It's, these things take work, it takes development. It's just like learning any other sort of art, whether it's singing or, you know, painting or anything of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And just give yourself grace and do it messy.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. It's like Jason Miller always drives home to all of his students, you know, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
I was just about to quote him on that.
Right. Yep. So yeah, I totally agree with you there. And so that leads really well into the next question, because somebody asked if you had to pick one technique, whether it's out of either of your books or anything else, for maintaining or developing psychic power that you could do every single day, and you could only do that technique, what would you do?
I don't know if there would be one specific technique, but I would definitely say meditation. And if we want to get more specific, I would say trying to enter alpha and be in alpha. I think that's definitely the core, because it's not just the meditation isn't just the meditation. It's not meditating for meditative purposes like other religions or spiritual paths like Buddhism or Hinduism or something of that nature. Like we're trying to get into the altered state of consciousness, and we're trying to learn how to shift our brain waves on command. You know, that's not necessarily the language that like the witches of the past used, but they were trying to explain the same thing with language that they didn't have, you know, to get into the witching hour, to get into that state of fascination. You know, fascination was the word for a long time. For a period, it was mesmerism, you know. But now we understand, like, you know, it's essentially getting into that altered state of consciousness where we essentially are, and this is where it starts getting kind of Kybalion and kind of like philosophical, but essentially where we're kind of more aligned with the dream of what reality is, so that we can proactively dream, like lucid dream, essentially, as a metaphor, which I would consider magic, but also be more receptive to what we're receiving in the dream. I hope I didn't go way off the tracks with
No,
that
it's
kind of
great.
weird metaphor, but
Totally great. Now, there is one question here that I saw that you responded to on Facebook, so I'm going to throw it at you again. What does it mean to master magic?
So this was, as I said, both Psychic Witch and Mastering Magick. I receive them, as woo as it sounds, I receive it in dreams. So I receive the title, I receive the spirit that's coming to me, which I put on the cover. And I usually get some sort of main idea, the aesthetic of what the book cover is going to be. So when I got Mastering Magick, I was like, are you serious? Like, talk about an intimidating title to have to write a book, you know? So when I say Mastering Magick, I'm not saying mastery in the sense of like knowing everything there is or being the most powerful, you know, witch or magic caster. Essentially, it's about mastering the relationship you have with magic in your life, being the master of the magic in your life, not mastering magic as a whole concept, because I don't think that's possible in one lifetime, you know, where the universe is magic. So for me, the way that I see it, you know, I don't consider myself a master. You know, I think there's very few occultists I've met, very few that I would consider a true master of magic. But I do feel like I'm a master of my magic. I'm a master of my magic and how I apply it in my life. And so what I'm trying to present is the tools and ideas for the reader to kind of start mastering it in their own life and step into sovereignty, which is such a important thing I try to drive home at the beginning, this idea that like you are the person that is responsible for yourself and your life and your impact on the world, both magically and mundane. And as you sort of develop in your magical practice, you start realizing that that border between magical and mundane starts slowly dissolving, and everything is just sort of magical. And a lot of that has to deal with connecting. I mean, you know, I wrote all this in the book, so there's no point in like going into it too much, but that's what I mean by mastery. I don't mean being like, you know, like a sensei of magic, so to speak, or like a black belt of magic.
I like that.
Totally fair. That's awesome.
You're the black belt of your own magic.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great.
So now somebody did have a good question, and you kind of touched on it a little bit in the book. So I'm going to bring it up, even though it does kind of go off to the side a little bit.
Okay.
And their question was, if they are invoking, let's say, a daemon or an angel or a deity or whatever, who is a master of magic, let's say Hermes or whatever, is that going to be just as effective for them for opening up their psychic senses and their perceptions as using, say, like daily meditation, daily energy techniques, things like that?
I think it would be helpful, but so this is not a simple yes or no question answer. You know, I think calling in someone like Hermes or Hermes Trismegistus or something, they're obviously going to have a strong focus on the mind and have because usually like deities and spirits, when you start working with them, they have things that kind of they push you towards. And I feel like those kind of mental development things, in my experience, those spirits of that nature push you towards. That being said, there is something to be said about working with said spirits to sort of develop and enhance those areas of magic, but I don't think it's an either or type thing. It's going to be hard to work with a spirit like Hermes, for example, if you can't perceive Hermes, and you can't communicate clearly back and forth with Hermes. I'm building to spirit work. Eventually that's going to be a book, but I'm trying to get people there. And that's why this book, I start introducing a little bit of spirit work, whereas Psychic Witch, there's no spirit work other than the spirit within your higher self. And I think one exercise to meet your spirit guide, the spirits there is a working at the end with Nemazine and calling upon Nemazine and her daughter, the Muses, and that's not just for inspiration, that it's to open up and build the faculties of the mind. So they do kind of go hand in hand. The way that I teach, I want to teach things that build up to spirit communication so that we do understand when it's genuine versus when it's just sort of, more archetypal. And you're really kind of accessing an inner part of yourself that resonates with them versus having the actual spirit there. So I know I'm kind of rambling, but it's not a yes or no question. These things work in tandem. It's just sort of like how, Psychic Witch, it's all about, building those inner faculties and then using that to sort of create magic with your mind. And then Mastering Magick, all the magic is geared, almost all of it is geared to enhancing your psychic abilities. And they kind of work back and forth and create kind of a circuit, so to speak. And I think working with deities that are connected with the mind and psychic ability and visions and prophecy is definitely going to help that. But I think taking a more holistic approach to it is going to be a lot more helpful than an either or type situation of I don't need to do this stuff because I've called upon Hermes. I think Hermes can help with this stuff and developing this stuff, but it's holistic. It's, it all works together and builds and helps.
Absolutely.
In my opinion.
Makes sense and totally matches with my experience as well. So I would totally agree with you there. And now I did have another question, and you do cover a little bit of sigil magic in your book, and you teach people how to do that. And then you do have a couple of techniques in there that are they're close to very talismanic type things. So somebody asked if using a talisman to open up your psychic senses is also a viable option. And I think that just based on the way that the question was, they're asking more, can you create a magical talisman that'll just, turn everything on? But I know that you're probably going to say that, it's a lot like your last answer. So
yeah. Once again, there is no fast food when it comes to genuine psychic and magical things. But magic makes things easier, so working with sigils, working with talismans, casting magic is going to help you. It's going to assist, it's going to make it easier. But I think I have not come across anything that'll just open the floodgates, completely. And that's kind of dangerous. And I think, we're the way that we naturally kind of progress into it is a healthy way to do it, so that we don't go into psychosis. We don't, completely overwhelm ourselves and, fry ourselves. So I have never come across a sigil that will open everything up. magically, fully. But I have worked with talismans for psychic development. I have worked with sigils for psychic development, and I do think that they help. But they're more like aids than a button you push.
The easy button.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. And yeah, totally again matches my experiences. And like you said, would you even really want that to happen? Like, can you imagine throwing on a talisman and all of a sudden, boom, you're in the spirit world and everything is just, right there in front of you? Like, I bet that would probably knock most people right on their ass.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then even experiences in my tradition. So like, doing certain rituals, like regardless of how prepared people think that they are, when you do really heavy, intense ritual, and for example, you start getting the apparition of the spirit, like you may think you're ready for it and you think you can handle it, but like when people are confronted with that, like it can freak them out, and a lot of the stories we get of people like ex-witches, converting to Christianity, that kind of stuff. I feel that's the sort of stuff that happens is once it starts happening, it scares them. It's no longer just sort of something they're dabbling in, not something that's just sort of like an escapism. But when you realize, oh, this stuff works, I think that can sometimes scare people. So I think that, luckily, most of us are not born with that full perception, or that full perception doesn't fully turn on, because I don't think I could handle it either. There's times throughout the year where I have to consciously turn it down because it's like, I need to sleep. I just need sleep. I can't deal with all this right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's funny that it's even too much for you, right? Because this is your life, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, but like at the end of the day, like I'm still a human being. I'm not. I don't consider myself a master, as I said. I consider myself fairly adept at things, enough to be teaching them, to teach them in my tradition, to teach them in workshops. But, I'm at the end of the day, like I am a seeker and a student, and I'm always, as I say in Mastering Magick at the beginning, I'm eternally thirsting, to learn more and experience more. And I think that's where growth occurs. And I'm hoping that I'll always be like that, because it would really suck to feel like, there's nothing else to learn or experience.
Absolutely, for sure.
So then
You're always
with you,
just a student.
let's talk quickly because we're soaking up all your time. Where do you actively teach, Matt? Like, where can our listeners get more Mat Auryn? Because I know I want some more Mat Auryn. So where do they find you? What do we do? What do you teach? All the things.
So the pandemic has kind of shook things up, and then I moved as well. So a lot of like my in-person workshops and stuff have kind of stopped. I am working on more workshops to be publicly available on our university, our online university, modernwitchuniversity.com. I teach in the Sacred Fires tradition still, but that's a very one-on-one mentorship, and it's very much, we are a lot more selective with that, Devin and I, because it is a one-on-one mentorship. But one of the prerequisites is that you take the Black Rose Witchcraft course, which is available on modernwitchuniversity.com. And that essentially will give you a pretty much a good foundation for magic in general, and witchcraft. That's done by my partners before I was in the picture. But I am hoping to create more workshops online that are public and publicly accessible to everyone. But at the moment, my focus has been books, writing, awesome. Trying to get that into people's hands. But I do miss in-person workshops. I do miss in-person, public work. And hopefully with this pandemic seeming to ease up a little bit, hopefully we can get back to the normal world of people interaction.
We're walking that line too. We used to do a lot of workshops as well, and honestly, we do miss it. But it's a fine line of balance of time too, right?
Right.
So then, and you did kind of allude to your next book. So you've already got one in the works. Is that fair to ask?
I have a
that,
couple.
or
I have a
it's-
couple in the works. So that one I was kind of, I am going to write a spirit book. That is not my next book though. My next book is sort of, I don't want to give too much away because I'm still working on it. I'm
That's good to
manifesting
know
it.
that there's a next book. So that's what's on. That's what's next for Mat Auryn.
Yes.
The next book. That's
Hopefully there's many more. I love
awesome.
writing.
We look forward to it because you write it so that even newbies like me and older ladies like me can get it. We get it. So you've nailed it for this category.
I appreciate that.
So I have one last question here for you, or sorry, I have two actually, but
Oh, we're
there-
really pushing the envelope.
there's one that I feel is more relevant, so I'm going to pick it over the other one. And
Okay.
the person just wants to know about both of your books, and can they use the techniques that are in the books to contact and work with and deal with both the paranormal and magical realms? Will it give them the tools to be able to, perceive, to actually, see the other side, so to speak?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that all of these skills are skills that are needed in mediumship. The book does not deal with mediumship. I do have techniques into scrying into what we would call the other side, which is reserved in my computer files for that spirit book that's coming up. If you want to learn mediumship, a fantastic book is by my good friend Danielle Dion. It's called Magical Mediumship. You will see it's highly compatible with my work. She's Sacred Fire. She's also Temple of Witchcraft. Like, we have a very similar background and lineage and cosmology of how we view things. And she's actually who taught me mediumship, because despite doing all the psychic stuff for years, mediumship intimidated me super, super hard, because more than the normal psychic stuff, like, that's a very sensitive, very intimate thing, to bring forward someone's dead and their messages, and you do want to make sure that it's legit, and that you are bringing them forward, and not just kind of giving them a bunch of like nonsense. And Danielle's work is really, really good in that regard, because her background is also evidential mediumship, and so that has been a big influence on me. So like, we want to identify and like get enough from the spirit to confirm that without a doubt that this is your dead before we start talking about spirit stuff. But as you were saying, we kind of address this. My two books are not necessarily focused on mediumship, because I feel like you need to build up to that. Essentially, like, I'm teaching you to walk, and I feel like mediumship in that regard, classical mediumship with the dead, is more running. And we want to get there first.
Absolutely. Makes
That's
total
fair.
sense.
Yeah.
All right. So do you have any more questions there, Ma? I know you had a...
Oh, I have a whole list of Mat Auryn, but it's all about Mat Auryn and not his book. So I guess we'll have to do this again.
I would love to.
So yeah, we will rebook and
that sounds great.
do a deeper dive into Mat, because there were questions I didn't get to, but it's a little, it's okay. We'll do it again. And I love that.
I'd be more than happy to come back and chat with you.
Awesome.
I really enjoyed this. You two are easy to chat with. And I thought it was really fun, despite me kind of going off into rambles. But a lot of these things aren't simple yes or no, answers.
Absolutely. And that's kind of something that you only get with the experience of doing this for, as long as you have, that there really isn't just a solid, this is what it is, right? And it's very individualistic as well.
Well, and then to go back to the Kybalion, yes and no are the same thing, but it's a spectrum, so.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming on. This has been absolutely fantastic. And I believe that we actually have a shipment of your books coming. So if people want non-signed editions, they can get them from us. And I believe you're selling signed ones, are you not?
I am. on matauryn.com. It only ships to the US and Canada though, because we've had issues since the pandemic started with shipping. And
Oh, we all know that.
yeah, yeah. But if you're Canadian, you know, I'm sure it'd be a lot quicker to get books from you than from me or any other US retailer.
For sure.
Awesome.
For sure.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. And I think we will end this episode there. And thank you very much.